Karlo on the road to recovery, presented by Hoag Orthopedic Institute. We're joined by Dr. Beyer and Dr. B. I don't know about you, but it is hot outside.
Well, as you could probably see, I'm nice and cool inside my air-conditioned home right now, which is where I plan on staying at least the rest of today and maybe tomorrow too. It's been a killer the last 5 or 6 days. I don't remember a stretch this hot for this long in here in Orange County in a bunch of years. And plus the humidity is so high. I mean, it's a tough combination for those who are playing sports outside.
Not to mention the air quality is poor. And again, this is early September. We're used to maybe this kind of heat for, like you said, not a long stretch in maybe July or maybe August. But this is the start of the school year. You mentioned youth sports is back in motion, and they're still dealing with this scorching heat.
Well, plus you got a pretty big fire burning in San Bernardino County, which isn't helping the air quality either.
Yeah, Doc, this heat wave, dangerous conditions. We always hear about it in the news when it comes to the elderly and the young infants in keeping them outside of the car and not locked into the car, not leaving your young kids in the car, but also youth sports. We have athletes in middle school and high school back on the field playing JV sports, JV football, varsity football. And there are a lot of measures being taken by school districts, preventative measures to allow their athletes to play. Now, Doc, did you see anything happen around Orange County or any games get called off?
I didn't see or hear of any games that were called off. In a way, this first couple of weeks of September is almost a little easier on especially those football teams than August when they're just getting back together in preparation for the season. They often have two-a-days. The schedule's usually a little lighter in terms of practice once season starts in September. So it's almost a little bit of a gift from God that this has happened now, not back in August. Most of our coaches, we've been through this so many times with them over the years. We don't have those old time coaches anymore who think it's a badge of courage to make a kid run two more laps because he was dogging it on one tackle or something. They understand the principles of preventative hydration. Have your little team meetings in the shade if you can, in between running drills and running scrimmages. Light on the pregame meal. The problem with football is that equipment is so much heat producing. The equipment that football players have to wear, which is a tremendous extra burden for the body to be able to cool itself on these days of 100 plus temperatures with humidity in the 80s and 90s. Our coaches are smart; they know what to do, and they drill it into the kids. I mean, fortunately, I haven't heard of any of the catastrophic things, at least this year, out here, that a couple that we read about in Florida, where a couple of kids unfortunately passed away. It's a preventative issue. And the other thing that you have to just keep in mind is that no football game or any other outdoor sport is more important than the health of your athletes. So if you have to cancel a game, you have to cancel a game. I mean, it's not the Super Bowl.
Sadly, as you mentioned, seven athletes just in the month of August. You can add another one this past Friday as a player in the Florida Panhandle collapsed, sadly, to their death on the high school football field. It's just traumatizing to think about, especially at the age of a high school student. But with that, that's eight high school and middle school students who have now passed away on the football field so far this season, two of them being from head injuries, the others from heat exhaustion. Doc, from your experience, we prefer the preventative measures, like you mentioned, shade, hydration. Uh, but what are some of the initial signs of severe dehydration and exhaustion that you should be looking for in players, especially in this heat?
So let's start with definitions first. You've got heat exhaustion, which is usually salvageable and pretty easily if you discover a player who's suffering from heat exhaustion, versus heat stroke, which is when the body's core temperature has gone over 104 degrees. And that's far more serious. Hospitalization, cooling baths, IVs. I mean, and hopefully you got to them sooner than before they had brain or other organ damage. So let's just talk about heat exhaustion, because that's what we're going to see most often on kids here. And The signs are um, usually that the child stops sweating, which is normally a cooling mechanism for the body, that you evaporate off sweat. Your body wicks away temperature by evaporation. When they stop sweating, when they've hit that heat exhaustion point, because their body is shutting down, basically. So the pores close and they can't sweat. They might be look a little confused. You'll see a kid walking back to the huddle who didn't take any kind of blow to the head or anything like that. He's staggering a little bit, only almost like he had a beer on the sideline rather than his Pedialyte or his Gatorade that he should be drinking. And mental confusion, maybe not knowing exactly where they are, slurring of speech a little bit. And a warm, clammy feeling to the touch. So their body temperature hasn't yet reached 104, that critical number, but they're already starting to shut down. The body's doing these things to protect itself. And sometimes those protections work against them because when you stop sweating, your core temperature starts to go up even more. So you want to catch them before that happens.
It's scary to think about, especially as a kid. All you want to do is play. Maybe the last thing that you're thinking about is my body sweating enough or that education. So hopefully we're seeing more athletic directors, maybe more coaches, trainers being educated to know what to look for when it comes to their athletes playing in the heat. Because like what you said, the preventative measures, uh, Pacific Palisades High School moved their high school game from Granada Hills closer to Palisades High, which was much cooler compared to playing out in the valley. So that was great. Another athletic director talked about how they were going to play a running clock. So the game didn't last more than 2 hours. And every 6 minutes, there would be water breaks for the players. That's almost something you would hear of in a kids' league. And then speaking of kids leagues, AYSO soccer, a very popular soccer league here in Southern California, they just straight up canceled all events to avoid any sort of danger. These are the kind of preventative measures that we like to see, right, Doc?
Oh, absolutely. And remember, your window of opportunity on a 60 or 70 pound AYSO player is a lot smaller and shorter than in a 150, 160, 180, 200 pound high school kid. They have less body mass, they have less hydration on board. So you have to intervene even earlier, just like with an infant. When we say when there's a real bad heat spell, the elderly and the really young you have to watch out for. As far as I'm concerned, the AYSO players are the really young. And you've got to be very, very cognizant of forcing them to drink water. They don't know enough to do it. And instead of water, let's go to Pedialyte, let's go to Gatorade, Powerade, something that has the salt compounds in it, because your body needs that. Your body doesn't just need water, your body needs electrolytes too. And Pedialyte's a great one. And we give it to infants when they're in emergencies and need IV infusions. And Pedialyte's purchasable now at any drugstore. And I probably lean towards that rather than the Powerade, Gatorade ones because it's a little bit more physiologic in terms of what the electrolyte balance is that's in it.
You mentioned about the athletes on the field. I don't know if you saw this, Doc. Dodger Stadium. They even offered free vouchers for water for fans over the last few days at Dodger Stadium just to keep them hydrated. I'm curious, Doc, what is that temperature? Is there a number where you should really be considering or considerate of hydration
You mean body temperature
or just
or outside temperature?
outside temperature?
So the problem with sitting at a baseball game, say, usually for at least the first couple of innings, even a game that starts at 7 o'clock at night, you're in the sun. Most of that stadium is not in the shade in those first couple of hours. Same thing when you're watching your kids on the sidelines at a football, high school, or junior Pop Warner or an AYSO soccer game. You on the sidelines have to be just as aware of that exposure to direct sunlight as the player on the field does. The player's going to have a trainer bringing them a bottle of water. Nobody's bringing you a bottle of water. So you've got to take care of yourself on the sidelines, not just the players on the field. You have to bring an umbrella. so you're sitting in the shade rather than in direct sunlight. I think there are things that we need to do as spectators that are really just as important as the players, because we're not being tended to quite the same way that the players are when we're spectating. So in crazy times like this, when the temperatures are really hot, and don't just keep chugging down a beer every inning to think that's going to hydrate you, because that's not going to hydrate you. That's not the kind of hydration you need. Sorry for Dodger and Angels beer sales. I might have just squashed it for you on these days, but that's not the liquid that you want to be substituting in your body.
If anything, isn't that gonna dehydrate you?
It does. Alcohol does dehydrate you, and it causes your body to shut down in terms of antidiuretic hormone and other things. It's the last thing that you want to be drinking in direct, hot, humid weather like that.
Well, Doc, what we like to see is the forecast coming up, and it looks like it's going to start cooling down. We're going to go away from this extreme heat wave. We're going to the 90s, I think, tomorrow, and we'll be down to the 80s, closer to a normal temperature on Wednesday. But still, very important to educate our fans and our listeners about a topic like this.
And that's it. An ounce of prevention, pound of cure, just like so many other things.
Yeah, you can tell a lot of other people may be feeling that this is not the end of extreme heat waves in the coming years.
Well, and especially if you're a climate change advocate.
Thanks a lot, Doc, for educating us about hydration, the importance of hydration, exhaustion, dehydration, especially in our young athletes. Thanks, Doc, for joining us on the road to recovery, presented by Hoag Orthopedic Institute.